How can you really know where something was made, or even what it's made of? It's easy to tell with real-life things, but what about the content on our screens? Now more than ever, verified authenticity is critical, especially with the advent of AI. That's why a global community, including companies, organizations, and civic leaders, have come together in the Content Authenticity Initiative. The movement's goal is to promote universal adoption of content credentials, the open standard for content authenticity and provenance that can be attached to images, video and audio files, documents, and more. Think of it as a digital nutrition label. Camera and software companies are already including it in their products. You can choose to embed content credentials in your files and make it clear for people to review. You can interact with this icon to see the origin and edit history of the file. Content credentials can be stored in the cloud for added durability. The underlying technology implements the C2PA open standard, and the Content Authenticity Initiative is helping make it more widespread with free open source tools. On top of that, we're working with educators, policymakers, creators, and the industry to speed up the adoption of content transparency. Together, we can create a world with trust and transparency built into what we create, share, and see online.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Big thank you to the people from Japan joining at 1 a.m. in the morning. That's impressive. Welcome to this Content Authenticity Initiative session, looking at authenticity in the age of AI slop. My name's Henry Ida. I am the founder of Latent Space Advisory and a Content Authenticity Initiative advisor. And today we are so lucky to be joined by some true veterans of the kind of AI slop and synthetic media space to have a really timely conversation. I should say, for those of you that watched last week tonight with John Oliver, that he kind of beat us to the punch by doing a big feature on this yesterday. So this is the second time, maybe for some of you listening to a Brit talk about this problem. If you haven't, I highly recommend checking out the video afterwards. But as mentioned, we have some great people joining today who are going to provide some incredible insights into this space. We have Alexius Manzalis, Bilva Chandra, and Sind Venkataramakrishnan, who are all just incredible people to be speaking about this. I think it's safe to say we are living in the kind of the slop age now, the sloppening, the slopocalypse, whatever you want to call it. Increasingly, AI-generated content is flooding our social media, our feeds, our email, even all of the different digital portals in which we live. And so I think we're reaching a point now where this kind of content is everywhere and it's getting better in quality at the same time. So what can we do about it? What should we be doing about it? What are the problems it causes? What are the challenges? And what does it pose for the future? Well, to start us off, I'm incredibly grateful to be joined by Alexius Manzalis, who is the inaugural director of the Security, Trust and Safety Initiative at Cornell Tech. Some of you might be familiar with Cornell Tech, who kindly hosted the Content Authenticity Initiative Summit a few weeks ago. And Alexius is, again, as I mentioned, a real veteran of this space. He led some really brilliant work at Google doing red teaming and adversarial testing around generative AI harms, and also is the author of an exceptional newsletter I highly recommend all of you sign up to. I think hopefully Jen will be able to post in the comments about it, called Indicator, which he writes with Craig Silverman. Really essential reading if you want to stay on the frontier of this challenge. So Alexius, welcome to the session. Great to have you here.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I also thought this was last week tonight with John Oliver, so I'm sorry. I guess I'm in the wrong place.
If I had my glasses on, maybe I could pull it off. But it's so great to have you here, Alexius. And we worked on these challenges for a long time in different forms and different areas. I can't think of many people better to kind of give us an introduction to AI slop. What really is this challenge? How long has it been kind of percolating in the background before we're now all hearing about it? How has it kind of risen, this wave kind of risen into the challenge it is now? I'd love to get a bit of that background on slop and kind of its origins and where it's going.
Yeah. And I think, I think slop is a wonderful term because really like evokes the fact that like the food given to pigs, it's kind of this unappetizing gruel being force fed to us. But it's worth kind of double clicking a little bit and doing a little bit of definitional work. I am a misinformation expert, and I remember how like fake news first had a very clear definition and then kind of got weaponized, changed definition. So it is helpful to actually call things by specific things and define them a little. Look, AI slop is ersatz content. It's almost like the real deal, but not an actual replacement. It's cheaper in a viscerally detectable manner. It fills our feeds, but it leaves us feeling empty. In a way, AI slop evokes spam, but down to the fact that both of them are kind of American terms for unappetizing or unhealthy processed foods. But slop is, I think, a broader phenomenon than spam. If the archetypal spam email was maybe the Nigerian prince scam, then AI slop does that, but it does also a bit more. So I'm going to present. Because this is such a great, very visual space. I'm gonna present and walk through kind of some like a bit of a categorization that I made of AI slop and some examples to get us through that.
Sounds great.
So I think like it's helpful to think about it from both a purpose. So like, what is it for? Is it kind of a social political goal, or does it have an economic financial goal? And then crucially, I think, what form does it come in? So is it expressive or is it deceptive? And I think especially in the kind of social and political corner, we've kind of seen this this narrative of, oh, deepfakes didn't really make a big deal because a lot of them were actually in this corner. Right, like they weren't trying to fool you. They were still doing something to our information space. And so in this corner, I would place famously the Trump Gaza video, which no one thought was the real Gaza, but obviously was a kind of a political message that distracts and removes from the serious discussion about what's going on in the Strip. Right now, between Israel and Iran, besides the very physical war, there's an AI slop war. This is the foreign minister, or the defense minister of Israel, posting kind of these grotesque images to describe what the Iranian regime is in. And then, you know, in a more whimsical level, there's plenty of channels, for instance, this one dedicated to famous world leaders dancing Kurdish songs. Right? No one is being deceived here. It's kind of a show of pride. Now, whether kind of having all those people whose bodies are deformed in the background of Obama dancing poorly a Kurdish dance is helpful or not, it's a question that I'll leave to the room. So that's one corner. And this isn't spam, really. Then there's the deceptive corner, and in the deceptive and political corner, you know, videos on TikTok that have done numbers purporting to show ICE officers apologizing or kind of being sad about what they're forced to do against people of their own backgrounds, etc. Or again, to remain topical, Tehran Times posting a VEO labeled video, so like clearly AI generated, to the world, claiming that it was kind of the bombing on Tel Aviv from Iranian strikes. So kind of there's a political certainly and social goal for AI slop, and then there's an economic one, and the economic one often comes in the form of, well, this stuff helps us get bigger audience. We can build up our following with eye-catching, low-quality stuff. And from left to right here, you can see a scantily clad weather presenter, AI generated. Doesn't matter that the weather behind is for Fijun or, you know, totally gibberish places and locations. There's still a slew of people making compliments to the AI avatar and creating engagement for the TikTok account owner. In the middle, you see a whole trend on TikTok of cute puppies being run over by trains or trucks. Again, not really deceptive. I don't think anyone believes what's going on, but it's engaging enough to build the view time and follower numbers for that account. pythons coming out of water. There's this, we'll see a few examples later, that there's just infinite. And then on the bottom right, there's like the economic purpose and deceptive. And this is something that I've looked in a little bit. So on Amazon, I found 500 books targeting kids, like biography books targeting kids that mimic an ape. And this is kind of one thing that obviously where AI slop matters, right? What they're doing is what the purveyors of AI slop are doing is kind of aping legitimate creative work, repackaging it at scale, and trying to sell as much of it as they can because it's so cheap that it doesn't matter if every one book sells very little. So in this case, you have a book called about the Genghis Khan, misspelling Genghis Khan in the front cover, with the author very much AI generated. I got Amazon to take down more than 200 books related to this operation. And then my colleague Craig found kind of a YouTube account that just pivoted from one engaging thing to the other, and now, as they all did, has pivoted to did he trial AI slop. So this is a little bit of the kind of a 4 quadrants of AI slop. This bottom right quadrant is what would really qualify, I think, as spam in kind of a traditional sense. And sometimes the bottom left is also in there. But it is, again, hopefully I've convinced the room that it's a broader, bigger issue. And so it's a lure, right? AI slop is primarily a lure when we think about scams and spam. And here's one example. On TikTok, I found a few months ago several motivational videos, AI-generated motivational videos of Donald Trump and Elon Musk telling you what to do with your finances, what to do in love. This is took 10 years to figure out. 400 videos, 700 million views. Now that's even for TikTok, that's a fair amount of views. And so what was this for? When initially I thought it was just kind of engagement bait. It turns out that yes, it's engagement bait, but then they pivoted to a classic Nigerian prince style scam of advancing the cash and never returning anything back. And so at some point the operation pivoted from just this type of video to the videos where they're like, if you scroll past this video, make sure to tap the 5 buttons, leave a comment that says yes or blessings, and you will become rich. And unfortunately, people did put I deserve it or blessings or whatever else the call to action was on these million view videos. And, some of them were like, I deserve it and claim it if not a scam, which bless her, Hester Dutolt. But yeah, in general, a lot of people, are driven from the lure to a scam. And then, as you can see, people, the scam compound replies to the people because you're basically self-selecting as a mark, unfortunately. And so I did also respond and connect with the number in this comment box, and it was a WhatsApp business account and ran by one of those presumably pig butchering compounds. They wanted my money and didn't give me any money back, which is very sad. But I did get all of the operation taken down by WhatsApp, which is good news. But all this to say, like, AI slop matters. Sure, it's funny, it's grotesque, it's filling our feeds, but first and foremost, it's serving as the top of the funnel for these big economic syndicates that are trying to scam folks around the world. And it is everywhere, just to wrap up. This morning, just for fun, I opened my burner TikTok account, which, as you can imagine, is extremely well trained to find garbage from the algorithm. And I think I went no further than 10 videos and got 6 AI slop videos out of them. So there's a submarine taking off somehow out of the water. You can't see it very well, but this is a cat that's doing incredible stuff in the pool. There's whatever the hell is going on here. Catastrophe porn videos are very popular, kind of tsunamis, destruction is certainly a lure, arrests, and more kind of unspecified huge monsters taking over the world. So there's a lot of it out there. I think it's helpful to distinguish what it is for, because some of it can have political goals, some of it can have economic goals. I think we can say a couple of things for sure. The first is that the reach is enormous for whatever reason right now, this stuff catches people's eyes, is engaged with. And the second is that sometimes we get a little hung up on the political component, as we should, and kind of ignore the fact that it has become a mainstay of the scam operations.
Wow. Well, Alexis, I can't think of a better way to start this conversation. Thank you so much for putting that together and for breaking it down in a way that I think is so useful and accessible as well. I certainly agree with what you started with in terms of saying, this term kind of gets weaponized. It sort of becomes sort of nebula and then starts to be used by people in different ways. And so having, deep fake was a term that had that happen quite a bit, as well as fake news, right? So having that breakdown is super useful. And it's really interesting to me that your kind of 10 video sample was almost a microcosm of the macrocosm of everything you just went through, in terms of you've got the political sort of propaganda of Trump, you've got the disaster porn stuff, which all could be used in the kind of emergency scenarios we're seeing in wartime. You had some of the kind of just absurdist content, which is just, as you said, engagement bait. But having that breakdown is so valuable. And I think, as you said, the funnel point is key, right? We're talking about the attention economy fundamentally, right? And how you get click through, how you get view time. And I think seeing beyond the top of the funnel, as you said, is critical to understanding what it's meant to be doing. So thank you so much for that introduction to this topic and giving us a bit of grounding for where we're going to go next. And so I'm really happy now to be able to welcome up to the virtual stage Bilva Chandra from Google DeepMind. And Bilva is an AI and safety ethics manager at DeepMind, where she leads ethics, safety, and governance for the VO3 video generation models and for audio generation 2. Bilva previously led the synthetic content portfolio at the US AI Safety Institute, has worked on policy research at RAND, and also did some product safety work on DALL-E, the image generation tool for OpenAI. So again, another real veteran of dealing with these complex challenges, and certainly on the front line of it when it comes to looking at things from the perspective of VO. So Bilva, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really interested to understand how you think about when designing these tools and kind of approaching what are fundamentally disruptive in both positive and, in the sense, kind of more challenging ways, I guess, content and how you go about making those toolings. We've seen with VO, for example, Darren Aronofsky making some really cool stuff with that tool set, right? We've seen some really cool creative work coming out of it. But obviously, as indicated, even though it had the VO watermark on it, there was a video in there that Alexis just showed, which was being, attempted to be weaponized. So really curious, as the person who's thinking about ethics and governance of these models before they're released and kind of afterwards as well, what is kind of the process that you kind of think through when it comes to slop as a harm? Is it something you think of as a harm in the same way as other kinds of harms that these tools might be used for? Curious to hear about your kind of thought process and sort of how you approach the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Henry, for that very kind intro, and excited to have Alexios's full rundown point of view deck. I'll show one example, but I don't have any pretty deck materials for you all today, just my thoughts. But I think it's a great question. And I think that it's really important to understand what is the actual content pipeline end to end, right? So there's the creation of this content, which comes more so on the model side from generative AI providers. But then you also have to think through what are the kinds of changes that happen to a content. It might go through an editing tool. It might be post-processed in some sort of a way. It might be posted on a platform. That same platform bit of content may end up in a WhatsApp channel. And so I think that when you're thinking about AI slop, you need to think about what are the various points of intervention with respect to safety and design, and what is actually possible in a given point of intervention. I work on model safety, ethics, and governance for video and audio generation. And so that doesn't necessarily involve all the different platform interventions, though I think that they're extremely important. But it's actually quite tricky to work on AI slop on the model side. And what I mean by that is there are many different versions of slop, as Alexios mentioned, right? There could be financially motivated, economically motivated slop. There could be videos that are actually pretty benign. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Italian brain rot videos. I actually enjoy watching them sometimes. And then there's deceptive, straight up deceptive content, which you could consider to be slop as well, spreading misleading or false information. All of these things have, to an extent, dual use cases, right? A filmmaker could be interested in using a video generation model to storytell, to paint a story that doesn't actually exist in real life and have all sorts of characters involved in that story. And maybe that story has to do with an immigrant struggle in the United States, right? And that same bit of content could be used in a malign context by a motivated bad actor for whatever reason. And so those kinds of questions you can't quite deal with at the model level, because you could actually be impacting speech. So the way that I would think about it is like, the way I think about risks is on two different prongs. Severity, how severe is a given risk, and likelihood, how likely is this risk to happen? And these are all considerations made for all of the video generation models that we worked on. And I do think that AI slop is a part of that consideration as well, but as a systemic risk, right? We want to be able to enable all of these different creative use cases of our model. And then at the same time, what are ways that we limit harm? And I think instead of trying to filter out content at the model level, which actually doesn't make sense because slop is so contextual, focusing on core harm areas that you actually would need to focus on. For example, non-consensual intimate imagery, right? Like that is a massive area of abuse, probably one of the most egregious alongside with CSAM, and extremely persistent, popular. That is a safety harm that you can tangibly work on at the model level. Similarly with extreme violence and gore content, right? So broader content safety areas. And then beyond that, there will for sure be a gap in which benign content can turn into slop on various different platforms, depending on the context, depending on who the actor is that's posting it. And even in situations where the content isn't explicitly malicious or deceptive, but actually maybe preventing an individual from getting access to the trustworthy content they're looking for. I think that's like a really important point to highlight, right? Even with benign slop content, it is flooding many of our social media platforms. It's flooding the social spaces that we interact with broadly online, and that could actually prevent people from getting access to certain types of trustworthy content that they would need. And a lot of that requires post-generation, as I like to say, interventions, like provenance work that I know this community is really passionate about, like the C2PA, which Google is a member of, and also massive plug, I guess, for SynthID, which is a really huge effort that has happened on the DeepMind side of Google, which for those who are not aware is a imperceptible watermark that's embedded in all of our video content. You can't see it physically, but it's there, and it's robustly applied across content, meaning that with like small perturbations, like theoretically if Henry were to crop VO generated video, you should still be able to detect that imperceptible watermark. So I think that that is one really promising bit of provenance work that we are working on. It's certainly not the end all be all. Sometimes folks forget with watermarks, like just embedding them is like at least just half of the actual equation. You also have to enable users to identify them, to detect them, and to even understand what they mean. And then that latter piece is a lot more difficult, but we're making strides in the latter half as well with our SynthID detector that was released on a wait list, and we're hoping to increase access to that very soon. But yeah, that's probably like the broad environment of how I describe safety by design at the model level, and why it's a major challenge for slop, and the kinds of interventions that I do think that we're actively working on and thinking about.
It's really, really useful. I mean, first thing, I didn't know you're such an optimist to think that the watermark was 50%. I mean, you know, come on, like we've got the explainability challenge. I mean, you're right. It's by no means kind of the be all end all of the conversation. But I love the framing that you provided there, Bill, around kind of the contextual, the pre and post kind of creation side of things. Certainly the case, right, with content moderation, that if you can design a classifier to identify a certain kind of content, it's much easier to do the kind of pre-generation, or at least the pre-publication side of things, right? Whereas, as you said, this is so contextual. I'm also partial occasionally to enjoying a shit post. Like, don't get me wrong, like a bit of absurdist stuff is good fun. And I don't think we want to be in a place where people can't be posting meme style content. We're policing anything that could be interpreted as as sloppy. I don't think we want to be in that environment, right? At the same time, as you noted, we are seeing this kind of floods of falsehood approach, which is a classic Russian disinformation technique, right?
Yep.
There's many different counter narratives. And I know Andrew Dudfield from the UK organization Full Fact, who has early access to SynthID, that's been invaluable for them doing fact checking and seeing how people might be trying to misuse it. And he stated the other day, which I thought was really, really interesting, was that he saw this last week with the Iran-Israel crisis. He saw that as a watershed moment where he said that he was seeing more AI-generated deceptive content being shared than out-of-context existing cheap fake content, as it's called, right? So I think the SynthID part is absolutely essential. And I think you guys are one of the only organizations I know out there who have really kind of pushed hard on this in the release of your video models as they come out. So I think such important work. I guess one question I have for you is also around kind of what you see slop as is it something you worry about in the context of how this might be changing kind of data and training for future models? I think there was this piece that came out the other day that was quite sensational that talked about, the kind of AI models of the present kind of spreading almost like nuclear fallout like they were doing the Trinity tests. And this is going to pollute the future environment for all AI training. Do you see that as a concern? Or I see it's a bit sensational, but yeah, I'm curious to see how you kind of think about that sort of framing of slop in terms of for big tech companies and people building models.
Yeah, definitely. It's a super interesting question. And I think it's something that people are thinking about, not just with respect to AI generated videos or like generative media, but just broadly as more and more AI generated content proliferates across the internet. That of course affects like anything from Google's models to open source models that want to update. And everyone knows that data is in many ways gold here, right? And having a representative set of data is extremely important. I think that, this almost builds a really great case for provenance, in my opinion, in a world in which we're dealing with more and more synthetic or AI generated content in comparison to content that has not been generated by these models. You want to be able to identify and distinguish and differentiate those two different types of content. If there is even two, I'd imagine there's like a hybrid version, one could say, right? Slightly manipulated, altered content. We could go down that rabbit hole for quite a bit, but you would want to have some sort of a provenance signal when you're filtering your data, right? And there may be some really great use cases actually to have synthetic data. Something that actually really excites me about video generation models is the ability to create brand new synthetic data sets for things like robotics applications or any sort of like physical agentic applications where it's very difficult to get like really good real quote training data for agents that are in the embodied physical space. And that's actually one really interesting use case for synthetic video data. So I don't think that it's all bleak per se, but I certainly think that the issue of model collapse is a serious problem. And lots of technical folks are thinking more about that on a daily basis. But I think that really builds a case for provenance solutions and durable signals that can be used as evidence, as ways to filter out training data. And I also think that presents a really unique case for how do we want to consume content in the future. It's more of like a philosophical question, but what kinds of content should be valued, and where does the market and taste and cultural consumption kind of align? And I don't really have a clear answer with that, but I think that there will be some like taste making to come perhaps in how this content is consumed.
Yeah, certainly some food for thought there, and not slop, some like real delicacies of philosophical questions there, Bilva. Thank you so much. And I think, yeah, the world models kind of view of synthetic video I find fascinating for, as you said, kind of training robotics and kind of like the future of some of the agentic applications that are really kind of coming down the pipeline. So certainly, as you said, I don't think it's something we should be inherently thinking it's all bad. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how polluted the future is for training in the wild. And if indeed we do see the model collapse challenges that have been certainly prophesized by at least some researchers. Although I know some others, such as NVIDIA, who've just acquired Gretel, which is a synthetic data creation company, certainly think that it's part of the future as well. So thank you so much for sharing those really, really awesome insights, and certainly get some food for thought over the rest of the session there around kind of taste making around slop. Our final panelist of the day, I'm happy to welcome up on stage now, is Sid Venkataramakrishnan, who is an old friend of mine. Sid is, again, a real veteran. Everyone here is a veteran of the space, but Sid and I really were doing deepfake work back in 2018 when we were kind of fresh to the AI scene, optimistic and clear-eyed, and look at us now. But Sid was a reporter for the FT, where he was focusing on technology, banking, crypto, kind of emerging fintech products. And he's now an analyst and an editorial manager at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, where he's focusing on areas surrounding disinformation, looking at things like the Indo-Pakistan crisis, and areas online where we start to see disinformation, kind of extremist content spreading. Sid, so good to have you with us today. Certainly looking smarter than me. But yeah, brilliant to have you here. You describe your work as kind of doing kind of AI or technological kind of sociology, I guess. And I know you've done some incredible investigations and kind of lurking in some interesting communities and groups online, and have really analyzed sort of the way that kind of the crypto grifts and kind of the internet grift space has kind of emerged. And I'm really curious to hear kind of how you've seen the kind of AI slop phenomenon emerge as well in relation to this kind of, these tools that are selling like faceless YouTube videos for passive income, right? Or AI influencers, create your influencer, you don't need to do anything. It's an end-to-end pipeline for content farming, for engagement farming. Again, this attention economy, gaming, but at the same time, we start to see the kind of the lines blurring a little bit between sort of that slop content, as Alexius talked about, and kind of deepfakes and deceptive content. So I'm curious to kind of hear what you think are the key motivations behind slop's creation, how you've seen some of these groups, communities, projects kind of emerge. And whether this is kind of the new face of kind of digital hustle bro culture, or if you see it as kind of a broader part of the sort of engagement farming, or indeed kind of the propaganda agenda for the future.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Henry. Yeah, it's very strange to think it was 5 years ago, just under 5 years ago, we actually met in person to discuss, deepfakes as, up and coming issue, which seems like a quaint thing. I think, as I said, you're lovely laying out of the different worlds of slop. I think that, certainly from a lot of what I've been seeing on X, for example, you see a great deal that is just economic. It's an economic model. It's people. I messaged a few of our posts content, and they say, for $60 you can get, for $200 you'll do a whole thread, and it'll be a thread that might be about seemingly something different, but then they'll throw in a link to this product, and they'll have a bit more detail there to try and say this is one you should use as opposed to the other ones. They'll often be sold in the way that a lot of content is sold online, in this kind of hustle culture, through kind of the language of conspiracy theories and the language of, I think what's interesting is seeing that there's a lot of cross between slop and non-AI slop, that there are a lot of accounts that are producing content that isn't AI generated, but is much the same, and the same narratives are being used to say that, this is content that's being hidden from you, get it from me and buy from me, and you'll make it big. And as you said, there's a lot of these faceless YouTube channels. There's lots of AI influencers, many of them where they're not actually pictures of AI influencers. They're pictures of real women, usually, which have been taken, or videos potentially retouched to make them slightly harder, I suspect, to find through reverse image searching, and then posted as if it's evidence that this system that they're selling is something that will make people a lot of money. And if they're offering something for $60, I suspect they're not making the $50,000 a year that they claim to be. But in terms of that kind of political divide, I think what's interesting is that we really seem to see, from the work I'm doing, looking at sort of misinformation and kind of as a holistic financial problem as well as one that is a political one, you do see a lot of crossover with political content, and it's hard to tell when that has happened because someone has made a political choice or that they are being paid to do it, or it's because they simply see that there's something, some money to be made out of it. And I'll quickly share, there's a Facebook page which I'm going to quickly share. Where's my?
I was going to say, there is no shortage of examples today.
It is this page, which is called UK Glory. It was founded about 10 years ago as a Mexican church page. And then it started just posting about 3 years ago, started posting a lot of content, a lot of it is kind of AI sloppy stuff. Lots of happy families smiling, mixed in with real photos, and then some very strange, dodgy, Russia UK friends at this point for a few days. But then if you look all the way up to the latest ones, it's really gone hard on the political. You have a mixture of Free Tommy Robinson, you have British Christian, and this change seems to have happened. And there are about 4 or 5 different networks of accounts which I don't think are connected. They seem to have different means and different administrators, and none of the others are using AI generated content, but they are all producing slop of various kinds, whether that's that might be stolen headlines, it might be generic photos of historic Britain with kind of dog whistly, things were great back then when Britain was British, but they all made the change around the same time. So I think it's really interesting to see AI slop as part of a broader trend of content that is potentially political, but inevitably economic. That's sort of how I'd see it. And I think the politics in some ways is secondary to the economics at the moment in terms of these kind of content. And then secondarily, you do have content like Operation Overload. You have a whole world of maybe more high quality AI content that is less sloppy and more directed, that is also going on, that does seem to be primarily political rather than economic.
God, it's such a fascinating insight. I love being able to see these examples and you being able to take me through this page, which has gone through this almost metamorphosis. And I guess what they're ultimately chasing is the revenue, is the followers, it's the engagement, right? They are looking fundamentally for that content. But yeah, I think it's fascinating to see this pivot. And I guess we also see this in when it comes to deepfakes and synthetic media being used in the scam space, right? Is that we're starting to see loads of these videos of, the Prime Minister of Singapore selling an investment scheme, right? And he has to then make a public announcement to the people of Singapore saying, there's this scam of me going around. This happened to lots of different celebrities. And a bit to what Alexis was saying earlier with the self-selection thing around the Nigerian prince scam, it's, for you and I, maybe we're saying this is clearly fake. This is obviously not, real, but it's the comment, show your support side of things. And they do it because it works. We're seeing this emerging. We're seeing it get momentum, right? Because it is working, because the opportunity cost, right? The alternative is actually no longer as effective as doing what they're doing now. So it is interesting to see kind of this cottage industry, as you've just illustrated, emerging from sort of hustle bros and that kind of culture online, moving towards this more sloppy space. I guess one question I have for you, Sid, is that I think one thing that's interesting for me is seeing how we're seeing this kind of authentic synthetic divide collapsing. And this is something I talked about in my 2022 documentary for the BBC, The Future Will Be Synthesized, was looking at this kind of question of what does it mean to live in a world where the authentic synthetic distinction is no longer as relevant? And you kind of touched on that, right? Is there's some authentic content out there now which has got no AI involved at all, but is it utterly banal and vapid and completely empty of any real content? It is clickbait, right? That term definitely predates slop. And likewise, there are some synthetic creations out there which are actually quite meaningful to people, more so than these authentic ones, right? In terms of their origins of creation. So I'm curious what you think about this, in particular in relation to some of the disinformation extremist groups out there, where we start to see people sharing a little bit like some of the kind of political narratives we saw around the US election, where people are sharing fake stories about maybe immigrants eating cats and dogs, which are then animated perhaps with an AI video, which then bring it to life in a way that it feels just as meaningful. In fact, it feels more meaningful than a real video of a political candidate saying, I care about the country and I care about you, when people can't afford to, buy their groceries for the week. So curious how you think about that kind of blending of that kind of authentic synthetic distinction around slop content, and particularly that political side of things that you showed so vividly in that page.
Yeah, I just think back to, when we had the first Will Smith kind of videos, and, there was so much comedy about how janky they were. And now obviously, it's hugely powerful stuff. But even I think there's a German page whose name now eludes me. I believe it's sort of anti-migrant character. It's a young blonde German girl, and someone's created an Instagram page where basically it reenacts her. It's sort of AI influencer, and it's sort of unclear. It's not hiding that it's AI content in a sense. If you read the book, it's a fictional story about what's perceived as a real problem. It's emblematic or symbolic. but it also doesn't exactly go out of its way to say, this is AI generated content. And I think it is really interesting. I guess it's the issue with disinformation, and looking back to things like cheap fakes of Nancy Pelosi being slurring her words because it was slowed, or even content that isn't a full-on synthetic. So sort of AI image, AI altered images. Also, in that very sort of blurred space between being literally authentic and literally synthetic and literally genuine or authentic, however to name it. I think that generally that divide has broken down in some ways, that there is a lack of concern about it, which I think has unfortunately manifested over multiple years. And I think that if you look even at earlier pre-AI slop and pre-AI misinformation or disinformation, and obviously terms like fake news are very contested now, in part because there's been a concerted effort to argue that actually what we are seeing is, even if the content is not accurate in a literal sense, it's accurate in a deeper spiritual or kind of grounded sense. It's a victory of vibes over reality in some ways. And I think that breakdown of that distinction really just speaks to the fact that this content generates images that people feel are true, even if they may not accept they're not literally true, but this image is something that speaks to them in their hearts. I saw it. There's too many images on the page to find, but if you look through, there's one of Keir Starmer lighting a menorah and stuff like that, which it doesn't look quite right. It is janky, but I imagine if you are going with the mindset of Keir Starmer is favouring Jews and Christians, then you will see this content and think it doesn't matter that his eye isn't quite. Oh yeah, actually, I will quickly show it now.
Got 1 minute, so we need to jump to the final question, but yeah, I'd love to see it. I think this kind of the age of vibes based, it feels true to me, it feels right, is spot on. It's an example I've made in a previous CAI session, was this example of a Dutch politician around their last election cycle sharing a picture of a guy on a private jet eating caviar and looking like he's living a life of luxury, which was fake. And people were saying, well, why are you sharing this fake stuff? It's deceptive. And the guy said, whether or not the image is real or fake, the content is truthful, right? This idea that it reveals that inner truth, I think is spot on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So definitely not perfect image, but you can imagine that inflaming certain tensions in a time like this. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff. Thank you for sharing, Sid, and thank you for all those brilliant insights. We're now going to move to the final question, which is going to be for everyone. So we're going to bring everyone back on stage now. And it's my kind of final question before we go to the Q&A. So this is your reminder, if you do have questions for our panelists, please do drop some in the Q&A. I can see we've already got a good number in there, but the more, the merrier. My final question for you guys is, what I would talk about is the kind of move from AI slop to the AI gourmet content, which is one where at the moment, a lot of these examples are kind of clearly fake, right? And we look at them and say that's slop because it's low effort, it's not realistic, it's not compelling, at least to people who can see that it's clearly fake, perhaps. But what happens when we move into a future where, AI tools are so powerful, and in particular in the open source realm, right, where it's not being necessarily created as thoughtfully as VO3 with you guys at Google? How are we going to navigate a space where the slop content we're seeing is actually incredibly high quality and discerning viewers such as us or the audience can't see what's going on? Is this where we kind of need provenance and kind of C2PA or other provenance approaches more than ever, or do you think that there are even deeper problems there? Let's start with Alexius. We'll go to Bilva and then Sid, and then we'll move to audience Q&A.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for this, Henry. There's this kind of framework in trust and safety, which is my field, that Camille Francois popularized, of actors' behaviors content, right? And certainly it's gonna be, even spending as much time as I do in the AI, in the pits of AI slop online, and kind of just being able to pick up aesthetics and things that maybe your everyday user wouldn't be able to. I know we're getting to the point where kind of the content will not be distinguishable, and so we need to go upstream to behavior or actors, and or kind of assign what I think is very valuable of the C2PA and kind of authenticity moves is it flips the equation and recognizes that, like, at some point In fact, not at some point. We've already long passed the Rubicon and given up on the fact that we're going to be labeling stuff, right? Let's take a step back and remember that in January of last year, all the big platforms, including my former employer, kind of made this quid pro quo of like, we will give labels in exchange for kind of doing our general purpose LLMs however way we want. And for the most part, that's worked on first party things, right? Like VO comes with very strong labels. Where the big platforms come short is on labeling third party AI content. And that's difficult for a million reasons. And we've seen Meta try and fail in a variety of ways. So yeah, I'm more hopeful for labeling authentic content than I am for labeling AI generated content, even as both come with challenges. And most of all, I think we have to operate under the scenario of context of just like investing a lot more on actor-based and behavior-based policies to detect scammers, disinformation agents, whatever it is, because yeah, it's going to be really, really difficult on content alone.
Thanks, Alexius. Bilva.
So there certainly is no perfect answer to this question. I do think that there's a lot of room for innovation in this ecosystem. And I think that there's a part of this, right, where we have to move beyond a singular piece of content or even a singular network or a singular bad actor and start thinking about how people spend time online and what kinds of digital spaces need to be created in order for people to access trustworthy information in a beneficial way. There's been a lot of work being done broadly in the authentication space. Like there's that very famous personhood credentials paper that came out, I want to say last year. Folks are thinking about authentication with respect to AI agents, which I see as kind of the next level, far beyond content, but rather when you have agents doing some of the posting for you, when you have agents doing content curation, I think it's important to kind of go back, similar to what Alexius was talking about, like what kinds of actors, what kinds of behaviors do we need to detect beyond just the content in and of itself. And I think authentication infrastructure is one piece of that equation, alongside all of the great work that the C2PA community is doing, alongside all of the watermarking work that we're doing on SynthID and ensuring that we can actually get folks to detect that content. And I think broadly, like building societal resilience against this is probably going to be the most important and the hardest thing to do. A key piece here is something that you can't really entirely bake in at the model level. You can't entirely bake in at the platform level, which is how do we actually educate individuals to be consuming the right content. And by the right content, I don't mean telling people what to consume, but rather having access to content that is providing beneficial factual information to users, and how does that get prioritized? And I think that's a broader question for the wider ecosystem that no one entity can solve. But I think that should be the core question, rather than, how do we label everything, or how do we ensure that everything has metadata? I actually don't even think that will be possible. And we're moving beyond the AI generated and not AI generated binary. There's plenty that will be in between. So rather, we have to think about what kinds of choices should we be enabling with like users, and what does that look like across platforms? What does that look like at the model level? And then how do we provide as much transparency as possible without, of course, overwhelming users with far too much information? Because that's been an issue as well in some studies and UX studies on labeling and providing access to information to users. So it's quite multifaceted, I think.
I think so too. I think that's a brilliant overview of the challenges. And I agree, Alexius, that I think labeling what's real is a way forward, but also having something like SynthID latent in all AI generated content, if it needs to be surfaced in some form or another, I think that's valuable. But I think you did a brilliant job outlining there, Bilva, some of the challenges. Sid, I'm going to give you a solid minute, and then we're going to get to some of these questions because we've got loads coming in, and I want to make sure we get to them before we have to wrap. But yeah, any thoughts or reflections?
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to take the less time because I'm not the expert on this, so I'm glad the experts got to speak first. I mean, I was just thinking about the ways that if you look on discussions now, it's the dilemma where any content, art, for example, is seen inherently as being AI generated by people. There'll be lots of accusations thrown around. I think one of the questions is going to be about sort of walking back the distrust into a healthy level. And when we talk about sort of consumer awareness, I think part of the issue is that we have understandably reached that point where people just don't believe their eyes around a lot of this content. And the default is a kind of distrust that pervades general society, whether that's distrust in establishment, distrust in anything you see or read. And I think that it's going to be I think that the issue isn't going to be solved purely by putting the onus on individuals, but I do think we have to think about the ways in which we engage with that. And it's not just a case of saying this content might be out there. It's saying, not everything that you read will be this content, and that you can accept that some things will be real. And as Bill was saying, having those spaces where you can trust provenance is really going to be important.
I couldn't agree more. So I think that's a brilliant kind of summary, and well done for being so prompt with your time as well. Good job. So I'm just going to have a look now over at our Q&A. We've had quite a lot of questions coming in, quite a few comments as well. So let's just have a look through here.
Can I grab the Zuckerberg one?
You certainly can. I was going to say it's an interesting question framed quite directly. So please, Alexis, take it away.
No, I mean, obviously there's.
Do you want to just read out the question? Sorry, just so people.
Sure. Open quote. We're going to be able to come up with like 4,000 different versions of a creative and just test them and figure out which one works best. End quote. Attributed to Zuck, the Manly CEO. Considering Meta is investing so heavily in becoming a slop engine for ads, do you all think there will be a user backlash as it consumes more of our online lives? Now, on Mark Zuckerberg's recent-ish transformation, we are going to schedule a separate session of an hour maybe in the near future. But I think there has been, from Meta's part, a very concrete decision to lean into the slop to the point that of making it a kind of aesthetic of its products, whether it's through the Meta AI standalone app, whether it's through really encouraging AI influencers on Instagram. Like, this is actually one of the first things Henry and I spoke about when I was out of Google. Like, there are so many virtual influencers on Instagram. If already our fitness goals, our beauty goals were unrealistic before, now they are kind of entirely unreal. And so I think the Meta has decided that this is a thing it will lean into, and maybe there will be competitors who can gain some of the market share, but saying we're not going to do that. Certainly TikTok is covered in slop too, so like I haven't seen that yet, but I would think that there's some space for a social platform that says, hey, look, we're go get that stuff somewhere else. You're not going to get it here.
I think it's such an interesting point. This idea that, we may start seeing increasingly a backlash from exasperated or frustrated or jaded users who want to have that certainty, right? They want to have that sense of navigating and at least being able to understand transparently what they are consuming, even if, as Bilva rightly mentioned, for a long time now, I think the AI generated or not AI generated framing has been pretty redundant. But even if it involves AI, just having that transparency, having, content credentials baked in or something that allows you to navigate it, I think would be super important. And yeah, certainly the virtual influencers side of things is pretty endemic. And I think, as you said, TikTok maybe not as much, but now that video really is accelerating, and as much as VO is probably the most impressive, it's certainly not just VO. There are some really incredible models that are coming out, have come out recently as well. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in on that one, or if there are any other questions that people have seen that they want to answer. One that I found interesting was someone was asking, is there a way that we can use slop for good? Is there such a thing as good slop? It's making me think of that good soup meme that went around a long time ago. Is there a way, I guess, that we can use sort of like mass consumed sort of clickbaity style content for positive in this way? I guess my initial reaction is, well, maybe we don't think about that necessarily as slop, and it comes back to this definitional quality. But I'm curious to see if there's any kind of unexpected upsides that you guys have encountered about slop, or if it is just, it's just pure bad.
I have some thoughts about this. I do think definitionally, if used in beneficial ways to provide people with access to meaningful information, ways to know their rights, like all of that, I'm not sure I would classify it as slop content, but I think a way to think about it is like tactically how slop is used, right? tidbits of short videos in order to communicate a particular narrative to grasp someone's attention for something. I think if that kind of guerrilla strategy perhaps can be replicated for beneficial use cases, like for news, for media literacy, for journalism, I think we would be a lot better off. I think a huge problem right now in the content consumption space is that there's always demand for more content, and it's not necessarily demand for high quality content. It's often demand for content that reaffirms pre-existing beliefs, or it's just straight up entertaining, and you end up spending like hours and hours looking at like ASMR videos involving AI generated strawberries, which I saw as a new use case for VO3. So I think the question really here is like, how do we empower the right communities to use these tools in ways to lessen the harms in the information ecosystem? And I immediately think about like journalists, human rights work, and to do like storytelling work. A lot of times, and I think we're doing this right now with filmmakers that don't actually necessarily have an entire team of like a crew of 100 people to help them design a storyboard, film footage, do intensive video editing of a movie end to end. Often they're working solo and they're creating movies on their own using VO3. And I think that kind of use case could be brilliant for a different flavor of storytelling, maybe in the media space, in the human rights space, for organizations that definitely don't have a highly staffed Hollywood production team to film their stories, or if they actually want to use AI generated people in their content for cases of anonymity, I think is a really interesting use case. If you don't want to actually, reveal someone or use who they are, or they want to use a synthetic voice instead of their actual voice. I think there's a lot of room for really positive, beneficial use cases to decrease harms in the information environment by introducing more important, trustworthy content and information. I think a part of it is like, how do we use the guerrilla tactics of like the quote unquote bad actors for positive use cases? And I think there's a lot of work to be done in maximizing beneficial use cases. But when we write like impact assessments for new models at DeepMind, like I don't only write about all the risks, but instead talk through like the benefits and how do we work on maximizing the benefits. And I find the challenge in the space is that because the risk is so imminent and present, it can be difficult to lean in to the beneficial side. So I would urge folks like watching the session who are working in the news space and the information domain to really think about how do you use these models for use cases to introduce more trustworthy information instead of denigrating it.
I think it's such a great note to end on, Bilver, and I think it is really important to say that, we've been talking today about slop and this low effort, low kind of quality stuff, but there is actually there's some really compelling uses of these tools. They are not inherently, bad. And I've seen some really interesting op-eds actually arguing, kind of saying like AI slop is good, and they're not saying it's good in and of itself, but it's a side effect of a mass democratization of creative tools that allow people to experiment, to play, to do things that previously were the preserve of a Hollywood studio or of a much more restrictive team. So I think you're absolutely right that there's certainly something you can learn as well from that guerrilla tactics as well. I'm sorry we don't have time for more of those questions because we just had so much to discuss. But this has been such an incredible conversation, truly. And I thank you all, Sid, Alexius, Bilver, for your time and for your expertise and your insights. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope the audience has too. I believe everyone here is on LinkedIn. So if you want to find Bilver, Alexius, or Sid, that's where they are. Highly recommend signing up again to Alexius's new newsletter, Indicator. Hopefully it's still linked in the chat. It's amazing. Please go check it out. And also, please make sure to keep checking your emails and that you make sure you're signed up to the notifications from the Content Authenticity Initiative for more events like this we're planning throughout the year. But for now, Godspeed in the trenches of the slop war, and looking forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much.